Washington-based Advocate Della Cronin of the Bose Public Affairs Group and James Brown of the STEM Education Coalition joined STEM Ecosystems co-director Alyssa Briggs in a discussion about what ecosystem leaders can expect from the current stimulus package and what they need to be doing now to ensure that students in STEM are well served in future pieces of legislation. This podcast is presented by STEM at Home, an initiative launched by the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice. STEM Talks is devoted to issues related to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on learning. STEM Ecosystems will continue to bring you lively and informative conversations with thought leaders, parents, students, and others all thinking about the pandemic and the need for STEM learning. And now, listen to the discussion.
So the first question that I'm going to ask you today is, and I think we'll start with you, Della, if that's okay, and would just like you to offer us a high-level overview of the stimulus package and what's in it for ecosystems, for school districts, and more importantly, perhaps, and more relevant right now, is what can we expect to see next?
Sure. So admittedly, the last couple of weeks have been a bit of a blur for a lot of us for lots of different reasons. But in the policy and advocacy space, we have been chasing details, provisions, questions and answers about what is in this third stimulus related to the coronavirus and its effects on the country. Really, top line is the headline of this bill is that it spends $2.2 trillion on efforts to either stop some of the economic effects of the coronavirus or address some of the impacts of those effects on public programs and systems. So in the education space, what that has meant is that the bill itself has about $13.5 billion that's going to be distributed to states via formulas to help them address some of the K-12 needs that they have. There'll be $14.25 billion sent to the states to deal with higher education issues, which, of course, the higher education system is suffering quite a bit as well. And then $3 billion that's going to go to governors that will allow them to decide how to spend those funds that best meet the individual needs of their 50 states. One thing to point out about this package is that despite its size, its education investment is relatively small. For those of us who remember the stimulus bill under the Obama administration, that bill had $77 billion worth of education investments. This only has just over $30 billion. In education investments. It also had some policy changes or the opportunity for policy changes related to K-12 and higher education. It gives the Secretary of Education broad authority to waive multiple accountability requirements across the education statutes. So she's able to waive the testing requirements required in the Every Student Succeeds Act, some of the reporting requirements in the Career and Technical Education Act, higher ed accountability. Similarly, she's not particularly awarded that amount of discretion in the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, but I think that the Congress recognizes that many of the things that we expect schools and institutions of higher education to do annually, they just won't be able to do. So she will be granting waivers to states, although it's worth noting that states need to specifically request those waivers and detail why they're making the requests that they're making on that count. I think that's sort of a top level summary of what's happening in that bill, and happy to talk about some of the details.
Yeah, great. No, that's very helpful. And James, before I ask you for some additional comment there, would like to drill down a little bit, if we can, and really probe, what does this, what should ecosystem leaders be doing now? What's in it for them? What should they be aware of? What are the action steps for them right now?
Well, it's an excellent topic, and I'll tell you, one of the things I think is valuable in this time and dealing with these issues is for the ecosystem certainly to be a hub of information like this to those who are in the school systems and the people in their network. I think everybody wants more information on this. And one of the things we've been doing as a coalition is taking all the information that we get on what's in these bills, how do people access the funds, and what does it mean for businesses and other people in the STEM community, and distributing them as widely as we can so that everybody has the information. Because I think for a lot of teachers and a lot of people in the school system, they're getting messages from their district and their leadership, but they're probably getting things that are more local to how those organizations are handling these issues, more operational. The details of what's in the legislation are not going to get to people in the school system until from their state departments, until it's been digested a good degree more. So one of the things we can help, and we've got these summaries, and I'm sure you do too, is make sure we share everything with you, and that the ecosystems can then share this type of information with the networks, and the individuals out there that are dealing with this. Because I think, just like a lot of education policy changes, these things happen at a very high level, and the more you can learn on the ground about this early, it lets you ask for things and lets you request things that maybe you didn't know you could ask for. And so, for example, this money that Dell was talking about that's going to school districts, it can be used for any purpose under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, right? Anything under the Every Student Succeeds Act purview, these funds can be used for. And that allows schools to think pretty creatively about how they deal with distance education and other things of that kind. So that's the first thing I would start with, is making sure they share information, and we've got that information to give to the ecosystems as well, and that they share it with their own networks.
Great, that's super helpful. Let's go back a second to Della, and of the funds that will go for education. James just mentioned that there's some pretty potentially broad interpretation of how those funds can be used, and you used the example of distance education. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the language does say, and maybe can the two of you brainstorm a little bit about how districts and ecosystem leaders may want to look at these funds and start thinking about how they can make a play for them?
Sure. So I think that the overarching goal of the Congress here is to make these funds as responsive to local needs as possible. And in doing that, they have deliberately lumped them all together and given governors and state education agencies and LEAs, in the instance of the K-12 money, pretty broad discretion. And I think that even after ESSA was enacted, and we were talking to the ecosystems and others who were interested in the changes that law would have on how programs worked, we certainly encouraged those who didn't have relationships with their LEA leaders and their SEA leaders to either forge them or strengthen them, to ensure that they were at the table when conversations were being had about local workforce needs, or about how to use Title IV Part A funds when those funds became available, what the CTE programs could be doing better. We were very encouraging of those relationships. And so for the folks who took that advice from us, or others who were sharing similar advice, they hopefully have those relationships and can be in those conversations about what to do with this money locally. And I would also say, my comparison of this package to the Obama stimulus package was purposeful. I do think, to James's point earlier, there are going to be additional bills, and the education community is going to be making a strong case for more money. So as we always say in the advocacy world, the best time to make friends is before you need them. And I hope the folks that we all work with took that advice.
Let's drill down a little bit on that, the best time to make friends idea. And if we could, can we identify some specific steps that ecosystem leaders can and perhaps should be doing right here, right now, to guarantee that when the next round of funding comes out, that we are well represented?
Let me take that one. So one of the things I think would be very, very smart for STEM ecosystems to be doing is identifying specifically how school systems in their, how the schools in their area, what their needs are with respect to digital and online and distance learning, and how the shutdown of the schools almost nationwide is changing how they see learning happening. And so I'll give you a good concrete example of this. One of the things that I think a lot of people have experienced is there are teachers who have some level of skill in being able to execute online learning, and that skill level varies widely. And I think being able to quantify what some of those specific needs are that you're getting from educators, their difficulties in connecting with outside resources and the like, are good things to have at your fingertips, because what I think is going to happen next, or sort of drifting into what Congress will do next, is they're going to deal with things like the homework gap and like some of the more detailed policy issues around bringing broadband access and bringing internet to schools that don't have them, and also facilitating um, partnerships in learning that are not just teacher to students at home, but also bringing rich content to those students from other outside partners like museums and libraries and virtual experiences that replicate those things. So while I think it's important to identify the gaps that we have, it's also really important, I think, to identify who we think is handling this well and identify ways that we might be able to scale that up if we had additional resources or changes in policy. One of the opportunities here is, I think, at the federal level, the appetite for reducing regulations and things that are in the way of those type of partnerships, barriers to doing them, is also fair game for this next phase of policymaking.
Della, anything that you'd like to add there?
No, I think the challenge that James and I both have in this today is that this bill is 48 hours, 72 hours old, and so we will be watching as closely as the folks in the ecosystems about to see how and when and where this money goes and how it's used to best benefit. So I think we're projecting our hopes and our experience onto what we think will happen here, but I think we'll know more certainly a week or 2 weeks from now.
Okay, and I think that it would make sense to check back in with you and perhaps facilitate a conversation with you with ecosystem leaders where we can, with them, design a unified plan of action for what the STEM learning ecosystems, is going to advocate for and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I
So
would agree. I would agree, and I would also share that we do work with the after-school community, and the first week of Congress being sort of on lockdown, the After School Alliance did their advocacy efforts. They were among the first to do it virtually, which was challenging, but also more successful than one might have thought, given the need to pivot like that. But also, I would just share that the staff, at least the staff in the conversations I participated with, were very engaged on informal learning, out of school time, summer learning. They understood its importance and its growing importance, considering that we're now seeing all these young people learn in different settings, and that honestly the summer is going to be a time when perhaps the community is going to need to pivot again to if we're back to something akin to normal, providing learning opportunities during the summer in the run-up to next academic school year. So I think there's a lot to pay attention to, a lot of opportunity for the community, and a lot of opportunity to serve students and the country well right now.
excellent. Thank you, Della. James, any final thoughts from you?
Well, I think, one of the things I take away from this, and I feel very good about this, is that these kind of conversations are taking place and that people are coming together to get engaged in this. This is, as much as this is a disruption for our country, it's also a chance to try some new things and to learn in new ways and for us to succeed. And I think the STEM ecosystems world is pretty important in this, just because we've been talking about changing learning to make it more modern. And guess what? The learning just changed, and we have a lot to learn from it. So we're going to need the ecosystems to be engaged as we make policy and make sure their voices are heard. And thank you for coming to us and having this conversation.
Thank you both so much. And we will circle back in, I guess, a week and a half, and have another conversation, and if it's okay, and really appreciate your willingness to keep ecosystem leaders informed about important federal developments and policies and opportunities. So thank you again, both, very, very much.
You just heard Della Cronin of Bose Public Affairs Group and James Brown of the STEM Education Coalition discuss what ecosystem leaders should expect from the stimulus package and what to do in order to best position their students and STEM for future federal consideration. We will be checking in with both again in about a week to learn of new developments and needed actions. See more resources, including updates from Washington, on our website, www.stemecosystems.org.